Hello and welcome to the Encephalitis Podcast. My name is Prav Prathapan and I'm from Encephalitis International. Today, as part of World Immunization Week, we are shining a spotlight on West Nile encephalitis and on the powerful short film Unconquered, battling back after West Nile virus, which brings this condition to life in a way that is both deeply personal and urgently important. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Tom Baldwin, who survived West Nile encephalitis and whose courageous story sits at the heart of the film, and Shawn Shepherd, multimedia producer and founder, president, and CEO of SES Productions, who brought that story to the screen. Tom and Shawn, welcome to the Encephalitis Podcast. How are you doing?
Be here. Doing well, thanks.
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Yes, lovely to have you. And yes, we're going to be talking about the amazing short film Unconquered. But for those who haven't seen it, Tom, I'm going to let you begin. What is your story with encephalitis?
My story and as far as what happened and where I'm at. Um, in August of 2024, that's when I was hit with West Nile virus. Um, didn't realize it right away, but I did become very, very ill. The first several days or so in the hospital is a total blur for me. I was apparently in quite a state of delirium, um, high fever, just very sick. All I remember is being um, wheeled out for one test after another, and being awakened with hospital staff looking over me saying, "All right, tell us where you're at. Tell us what year it is." I was apparently exhibiting a lot of confusion. Um, but eventually, one of the tests, the lumbar puncture, which is as pleasant as it sounds, that's the test that came back and confirmed that I had West Nile virus. So I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and then I was sent to a rehab hospital where I spent 3 weeks. I was extremely weak, and I really couldn't move my legs barely at all. Um, I lost an extreme amount of weight from atrophy, which I'm still trying to get back. I'm getting there, I think. But yeah, and then I returned home in September of 2024, and I had a hospital bed in my dining room, and I was still pretty weak and had to. I used one of these sliding boards to get from surface to surface because it was still hard to just get out of bed on my own. But I was gradually starting to recover uh, and build up strength. Uh, the impact was asymmetrical, so it's much more of a left leg problem for me. Um, but I started doing a physical therapy pretty early on. Of course, in the rehab hospital, that was physical therapy, although I was just still so weak I couldn't do a whole lot. Um, but I started going to outpatient PT here at home, and after taking a break, I'm about to return. So everything's been gradually coming back at this point, which is the around the 20-month mark. Um, I I don't have. I'm still lacking some function. I lack dorsiflexion in each foot, and on my left side, I still cannot lift my left foot. But with the help of AFOs, ankle foot orthosis, um, I can do some walking at a rolling walker because those allow me to get some lift even with my left leg. And yeah, I'm just focusing on what I can control and staying disciplined and building up strength. And the strength is coming. It's the recovery process uh, is nonlinear and a very slow progression, but I continue to see it. And my goal for this year, which I think is pretty realistic, is to get enough strength to where I can do at least limited walking with a cane. That's my goal for this year, which I think is realistic. But um, I've learned to stop putting time frames on things because I'm always wrong. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Amazing. And the film is so inspiring because you do talk about goals in that film as well. And so it's amazing to see you, even after the film, after everything you've been through, you're still setting goals and still working towards something. And that sense of progress is palpable and it's really inspiring. So thank you, Tom. And yeah, Shawn, can you tell us a bit about your story and then how you came to meet Tom?
Certainly. My background is in news journalism. I've done that for many years. And one aspect I worked in many years was in the energy and environmental. I did a lot of environmental journalism. And that took me out to really broaden my horizons, so to speak, because prior to that, mainly doing the news beat, doing what was happening, and covering issues, maybe covering profiles of individuals. But when you get to the environmental, you begin to start seeing the importance of the balance of systems, what we do on one end, the impact it has on the other end of the spectrum. You began to see that sometimes there was a cost to things, and these costs had rippling effects that could impact not only individuals but also habitats, systems, some natural systems. So all of that really, really was just very compelling to me. So eventually, I moved away from that, went back to regular news stories, business eventually when but I always had a love for that. I always had that love for just environment. So it turns out, as with anything, especially if you're in news, you're always just listening. You're listening to find out just what's happening. This story and this film really was generated off a conversation. My uncle lives in the same neighborhood as Tom. My uncle one day was just in a casual conversation saying, I have a good neighbor of mine who is really going through it right now. And oh, wow, what's going on? Well, he has West Nile virus, and we went to visit him in the hospital. We don't know if he's going to make it. I mean, he really is in bad shape, you know? And they were just saying, just they had never seen a guy who, on one end, had been just upright, walking his dog, going up and down the sidewalk, and then suddenly immobilized in the hospital bed. And see, so when all of this was occurring, it was the type of thing where I would every now and again just check back in with my uncle and say, "Hey, what's the status of Tom?" Oh, well, Tom is still in the hospital. He's still, working through it. They're still trying. And then eventually, I found out the stages. Tom moved from the hospital to rehab, and the hope was he would eventually get home and come home and all. And so that, you had always heard about West Nile. Whenever the season comes about on the news, hey, mosquito was tested positive with West Nile. So therefore, it happened all the way over in this county or in this state. So you heard about these things, and you're just like, oh, okay, yeah, West Nile virus and all. When you then hear Tom's story and you hear alerts about West Nile virus, then suddenly there's a difference. Then it's like, oh, okay, that West Nile has the capacity to do this to the human body. And so I wanted to learn more. And so, I went and just did a little bit of research on West Nile and the different neuroinvasive effects that it can have, the West Nile encephalitis, as you said, and what that does with the inflammation of the brain and the repercussions that has on the neurologic aspects of the body. And so I eventually, as time passed, after Tom got back home, I asked my uncle, I said, "Do you think Tom would be interested in talking to me? Could I talk to him?" He said, "I don't know. I can reach out to him and see, and we can just go from there." Well, Uncle did talk to Tom. Tom was open to talking to me. And I wasn't talking about necessarily telling the story right off the bat. I told him who I was. I did tell him I was in media. So I'm sure he put, one and one together. But I said, I would love to talk to you. Tom was very gracious. Tom said, "Hey, come on by the house." And one thing I want to say, Prav, is that the importance, I think, of also letting time pass with some of these things. When individuals are going through something as traumatic as that, um, yeah, you kind of want to go and, hey, what's going on? You kind of need to just, I think, from my perspective, let some time pass before approaching and having them basically recount that nightmare. And that is exactly what Tom did. Tom stepped me through when I went into his house, sat down, stepped me through everything he just told you about what he went through. And after he finished that story, I said, "Tom, I said, this is amazing. I said, this is tragic what has happened to you." I said, "But the world needs to know about this. The public needs to know about this. Would you be willing to share your story?" And Tom said, "Yeah, I think I would." And one thing about Tom is, uh, Tom said, he's a shy guy. I'm a shy person. Getting in front of a camera talking, I don't know if that's something I'd be, comfortable doing. But I appreciated his courage of willingness to do that, because that's not easy, and recounting that. Fast forward, so we're in 2024 at this time, but we're more so close to the end of 2024. 2025, I'd say, going through winter and spring, I check back in with Tom periodically. "How are you doing?" "Hey, doing okay. I feel like I'm getting stronger, but still not walking, going through physical therapy." I reached out also to a few entities who I thought would possibly be aligned with this type of storytelling, and just tried to see maybe if I could get some sort of funding, some sort of backing, and unfortunately was not able to. And it just got to the point where, I want to say May of 2025, I called Tom and I said, "Tom, I'm just, let's just story. I'm gonna bring a camera, I'm gonna bring some lights over there. Let's just do your story if you're open to it." And Tom agreed to that. And so what you saw in that film was over a couple of days of filming, going in and talking to Tom. What you see in there is Tom's living space. That's the space that he occupies. And as he is telling this story, um, even as I'm filming, it was very moving. It was very jarring. It was it still went back to the fact that here we are talking about a mosquito bite, and all of these years I have looked at those as being just very, benign. Yeah, it's itchy, it bothers me, but I've just didn't pay attention to it. Tom, in even doing the interview, as he is telling me this story, ended up changing my perspective on how I need to approach when I'm outdoors, when I'm out doing a hike, when I'm working in the yard, in just doing preventive measures on my end. When I put all the footage together, or as I was going through the footage afterwards, as you know, you always, as a filmmaker or any type of artist putting together a piece, it's like, how are you going to tell this story? But Tom, I found uh, he gave me all the elements that were there that needed to be told. You know, he talked about what he went through. He talked about the confusion, he paralleled it with literally going in and out, not knowing where he was, telling us about the doctors as they are at different stages. You know, he went to urgent care. Urgent care is like, hey, go home. We're giving you some antibiotics. No, something's much worse going on here, much worse. Go back, urgent care. You better go to the hospital. Hospital, everybody running around trying to figure out what's going on. I can imagine that's just very nightmarish. And so, as I began to take these elements and just really glue them together, I said, well, let's follow the path of the story and the journey, where he is with the recovery, and then looking at it on the wider scale of um, what is out there right now and what was happening. It was a unique time in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, at the time, where there were, and I wouldn't quite call it a record, but there were a large amount of West Nile virus infections that summer. Really, and it was a really large amount of neuroinvasive. So we're talking about people who likely had to get some sort of medical treatment or go to the hospital. Um, and we don't know how many people were in Tom's situation, maybe temporarily paralyzed. Some people come back from it. But we do know that this was happening on a large scale, on a wide scale. You do recall in the piece, and what I love so much is that Tom touched on what was happening outside when he said, you know, I heard Dr. Fauci was struck with this. And we do learn that Dr. Fauci himself said that this was a very severe disease that he didn't know if he was going to make it through. So we knew that, you know, we had this wider view. So gluing all these pieces together, supplementing that with Tom, I thought was great in talking about. I think there needs to be a vaccination or a vaccine created for this. You know, yes, we look at the small amount of people on the scale of this rare disease, as they call it, small amount of people who are impacted, but at the same time, they are impacted. And it does have a wider view. People are affected, families are affected, healthcare systems have to take care of things are strained. You know, I mean, it can be tremendous. So getting all of those elements, putting them together allowed for, I felt, a very full story, full story, and also maybe a conversation starter. It doesn't focus on necessarily the science of this. We're not dealing deep in the science. This is more of this did happen. There is some science there because we know that these insects do exist. We do know that the bites, you know, the neurological effects that it can have, neurologic, but it doesn't get into the, you know, deep, deep science. I wanted to focus more on the human aspect with this, and I think it helps to create an effective narrative, so to speak, that hopefully has people saying, "Hey, you know, let's look into this further," or "I want to look into this further," or "When I hear about West Nile virus, let me pay closer attention to it." You know, I was really appreciative of some of the feedback that I received, where some people were like using terms like, "This is very eye-opening. This shows you how the randomness of nature." That this can happen. You had some people, as I had a couple of public infection leaders who reached back out and said, "Thank you so much for shining a light on this. You know, thank you so much for." And what I loved following all of these were, do you mind if I share this? Do you mind if I share this? I think that's the key to all of this is, can we get this out? The more we share, the more we know, uh, the more we can take steps to do our preventive measures, and then maybe really advocate for the vaccine development in some form or fashion. So overall, that's how all of this came about, and I still am just very thankful for Tom in being brave to tell that story, because that's not easy. And I remember when this film was shared with another West Nile survivor in another state. This was a whole nother state. She emailed me and said, "Thank you so much for your film." She said, "I couldn't have done that. I could not have shared my story like that." She was said that that was very brave of Tom to do that, and she commended him. So survivor stories, I think, really can have impact, and can really bolster change. I really do, or at least spark the conversations that hopefully can, maybe build some momentum for that change.
Brilliant, Shawn. Thank you so much. Tom, before I ask you my next question, do you have anything to add to what Shawn just said?
Only that, I was a bit reluctant. I don't like putting myself out there, right? But I think the big thing that really convinced me that it was worth doing this and important for me to go ahead and have my story be told is something Shawn said to me. I was already convinced that, yeah, it would be a good idea if it can bring awareness. That's a good thing, but I'm not sure I want to do it. But uh, when he said, uh, you know, when people hear like facts and figures, that's not going to motivate them to act very much, but a good story will. And that was like a really key thing when he said that, where it hit home like, okay, this is important to do this because stories are much more effective. Stories from somebody that's been through it, may probably more so than what any doctor could say, right? Nothing against doctors, but so that's the only thing I'll add to that.
Amazing. And Shawn mentioned some of the feedback that he'd received. I was wondering if you have received feedback as well.
Yeah, I sent it out to many of my friends and acquaintances and neighbors, and yeah, they had a lot of positive feedback from me, so along the lines of what Shawn was saying, that you know we're proud of the courage you showed, um, and they were also very impressed with the film itself. They were like, "Wow, that was great," and that's something I was very pleased about. I was even reluctant to watch it at first because we hate seeing ourselves right on camera, and I'm not accustomed to that. And then I watched it and I was like, wow, because I had no idea. Right, uh, I didn't know much about Shawn's background, and then I saw the film and it's like, wow, that was pretty damn good. So I was very pleased about that.
It was damn good. So yeah, thank you for doing that. And yeah, I want to go back to Shawn. I actually did a podcast a few months back with Scott Z. Burns, who was the writer for Contagion, that film that became popular during the pandemic. One of the questions I'd asked him was how was the science and the art balanced? And that's going to be my same question to you, Shawn. How did you manage to find that balance between the science and the art?
Yeah. I will say I'll never forget. I saw, just before I answer your question, I saw Contagion really recently. I didn't see that when that first came to theaters. And you talk about a chilling story to watch, especially because I didn't see it until after really we experienced the pandemic. And I was like, this came out well before, so many years before the pandemic, but it was so I was amazed at the storytelling, the accuracy, the just everything that I was seeing. I was like, wow, you talk about prescient filmmaking, prescient storytelling. That definitely was, and that was from top to bottom, just really well done. When you talk about balance of the science and the story, it's I want to say that I think you have to go into it and saying you can't negate the science. The science is there. Um, and really, the science is what, in a way, influences the story because essentially we wouldn't really have this story had it not been for West Nile, happening and West Nile going on. So it's one of those type of things where I think what I was trying to show is how we're moving through life on a daily basis, just going out, going to the store, meeting people, going to our jobs, all of these things. And yet science is happening around us all the time. And it's happening in ways that sometimes we see, and in many ways we don't see. And I think what my balance was okay, let's show Tom with Tom daily life, show Tom what the neighborhood was like. Tom used to, bike, he used to do all sorts of things and moving around. And yet at the same time, mosquitoes are moving around. You know, these there is a threat that is out there that we don't necessarily see or know about. And my thing was, as we are showing those aspects of Tom, balancing, I thought that using just the sound bites, the news clips where people are talking about, um, uh, the West Nile being found over in this county, West Nile being found in this county, you need to do protection, yet and still we're just moving along with life. Um, my goal was to say, okay, again, science is happening around us, and yet at the same time, science can move in on us. And when it does converge, um, sometimes it can be very positive, and then sometimes it can have negative effects. And with what happened with Tom after having the impact of the, I almost want to call it mystery of, I'm not feeling well. And then you have the doctors, because what happens when we don't feel well? Well, we go to a doctor, we go to a medical specialist, we go to someone who is going to use science, research to try to analyze what is going on. And so being able to strike, move back and forth with doctors not quite figuring out what's happening, doing their best analysis to come up with some sort of solution. That solution doesn't work. Tom is still suffering. Um, it to me, it was just one of those things where uh, it just had a natural beat, a natural rhythm to the story because it could not be ignored. Um, when Tom eventually went to the hospital and they finally ran the tests and did the uh, I want to say when he was talking about they did the spinal tap to find the West Nile, that gets pretty technical. And I will say that there was a lot I had to leave on the cutting room floor, so to speak, because you can't. It would have ended up getting pretty vast. It would have ended up causing me to start going to make a left turn here in order to explain a particular topic and the science behind that, and then try to get back to Tom. I felt that that would impact the rhythm of the piece, the flow of the piece. So I was like, let me give just enough science so that we understand what is happening, to give us a bit of a framework and give us context, but still keep it moving where we still have this human story. So that's why when I said earlier that, this particular film doesn't focus on the science of it. It doesn't get deep into the science. At one point, I was considering that. I said, how about we talk to Tom? We also talk to maybe an infection specialist. We talked to a West Nile virus specialist. And I just thought, I said, well, that's going to start getting a little bit too vast. I said, let me just focus on this particular piece, his journey, his medical journey, and the medical journey will rope in, add in, layer in aspects of science, as we go. And I think that the balance is just right there, because we go from in the hospital, we go to rehab, we go from rehab to his personal take on, well, this is what I kind of think people should do. People might, should do. And then maybe this leads into vaccine development. And we're able to then, kind of touch on that again, spark conversation. And that's the goal with this. You would be able to probably do a really comprehensive documentary on West Nile virus. I think you could probably do a multitude of stories about West Nile, about Zika, about dengue, about all of these things, about just encephalitis itself. I mean, all of these things could just be done. So I'm just hoping that this is a small part of that entire spectrum of storytelling that helps us get to some sort of solution to some of these issues. And so the balance of science is one of those things where sometimes after watching it back, when I would do a pre-cut, you're looking at it and you're like, it's not quite flowing because I got a little bit too much here science-wise. Or even if I do dabble into this, somebody watching is going to say, well, wait a minute, I'd like to know more about that. And that's going to require more. That's going to require a longer story. It might even require a pivot in the storytelling. So it's just it's a delicate balance, I would say. It's a delicate balance, but one that still you find where the science is in service of the story, and you put it in there.
Amazing. It reminds me of this quote from, I think Steve Jobs once said, the art is in knowing what to leave out, not put everything in it. So, and you're absolutely right. Like, there is science in it, but you don't feel it, just on your face. It's really the story that comes first, and the science helps you understand the story. It's really well done. Tom, do you have anything to add to that before I ask you my next question?
Up and down.
And my next question was going to be, Shawn earlier did say, Tom, that you are a rather shy person. And then here comes this media person coming to your house and saying the world needs to hear this. How did that make you feel at first?
It was like, oh boy, is he going to try to get me on film or something like that? And I'm not sure I want to do that. But something just told me, you should just go with it. Maybe it can do some good. Maybe there's a reason for all of this, and that's what convinced me to go forward. Yeah.
In a related question, what therefore would you tell someone who might be listening, who is affected by encephalitis, who's debating whether or not to share their story?
I I would just say it's an important story to be told, right? If we've got it, and I think Shawn mentioned it, I don't think people really realize how impactful this virus is. I think the numbers can be misleading because only a small percentage of people who get West Nile have the neuroinvasive impacts like I did. And however, I've heard of numerous people who've been impacted, and I even the sister of somebody I know personally died from West Nile encephalitis, and so clearly it's having a lot of impacts out there, and therefore there needs to be more awareness. And those of us who have been impacted, it's an opportunity for us to help bring awareness and make, in the hopes that it'll do some good. So I guess that's what I would say is, there we can do some good by sharing our story.
Well said. Thank you, Tom. And we are coming towards the end of the podcast. And of course, we're spotlighting World Immunization Week. And Shawn, I believe you had something to say to our viewers about this important week.
Yes. We have so many things out here that drive attention. I know that the numbers tend to speak to what we address. Large populations, large swaths of individuals affected by things tend to get the attention. But at the same time, what we quote unquote call rare diseases do exist. And as I said earlier, they do have impact. They impact families. Tom, think about it. Here is someone who had to adjust. When I went over to his home has to be now, his home had to be retrofitted for an individual who can no longer walk, So you're talking about ramps that had to, his occupation, all of these things, family members having to support different things that just have these impacts. The medical care that he has, not only that he experienced through this ordeal, but then the medical care that he's still getting treatment for. That Tom is just one person, and more people are being impacted, and we're seeing an increase in this. This is increasing. Climates we're finding that warmer climates are causing warmer seasons to last longer. Therefore, a lot of these mosquitoes, ticks, all of these creatures are staying alive longer and have a longer, I almost want to say, unfortunately, a longer time period to impact individuals. So there clearly is a need for prevention. There is prevention, protection. I thought that Dr. Fauci said it himself. Here is a man who his whole life has been steeped in infection control and in public health, and he himself says that more needs to be done about this. More research needs to be done about this. Development of a vaccine needs to be done. We know that there's a vaccine for horses. They created the equine vaccines, but they say that it can be a little bit difficult. And with creating the vaccine for humans because of the the random nature of the virus or mosquitoes, because just like Georgia had that huge outbreak, that particular or very large, I won't say huge, but larger than normal outbreak that summer, the following summer, it wasn't just as much. It wasn't quite as much. So we know the scientists need for sampling purposes, they kind of need certain things for consistency that just helps in the creation of it. But still, we know that There's some amazing science out there. There are some amazing scientists out there. And just like the Artemis right now is, over here headed to the moon and will be back very soon, um, we have the will and the capabilities to do extraordinary things when we want to. And I do think that this is something that needs to be looked at very closely. I think that this could be a very large threat that could come upon us when we least expect it. So if we could at least get in the mode of preparation, of having something that mitigates the impact, that would be great. Because just like Contagion was a film, um, who's to say that one particular summer, one particular period, there's just a really large mosquito population that is blanketing large swaths of the country, and a lot of people are being infected. Because it can happen to young, it can happen to old, and I almost agree with Tom in that the numbers I think might be misleading because those are the numbers we see are the numbers that are reported. You know, think about some of the ones that may not necessarily be reported, and also think about the lag time with some of the reporting where it takes place. So there are a lot of variables to consider, but I think that anything that has the capacity to render inflammation of the brain, inflammation of tissue around the brain, inflammation of spinal cord, anything that could lead to um, paralysis or even death, uh, we need to really look at closely and see what preventive measures we can do aside from what we do at home for ourselves and putting on bug repellent, wearing long sleeves, watching, where we our time outside, to vaccines and the creation of a human vaccine for West Nile encephalitis.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shawn, and thank you, Tom, as well. It's been really a pleasure to have you both. And we have come to the end of the podcast. And just before we close, I was just wondering, is there anything that we have not mentioned that you'd like to mention? Start with Shawn and then Tom.
Last thing, thank you again for this opportunity. This is just fantastic, in being able to share the story, and thank you for your kind words on the film. I'd say my last thing, another thing I think could also be, um, another thing I think the film could spark a conversation on is maybe bringing West Nile virus testing maybe a little bit closer to the forefront when patients are coming in with things that they can't necessarily put their finger on. It might be the type of thing where it's like, okay, we already know that we test for A, B, C, D. We might want to start, and maybe they already have this, but I have read of cases where doctors just seem to be stumped, and it's not until they might, it depends on where they're located, that you might have that infection specialist who's just like, I know, let's go ahead and test, I know exactly. But think about some other medical outfits and some other places where doctors are just like, give them antibiotics, give them more, give them stuff, but they really don't know what the core is, and time is of the essence because this is spreading. And maybe if they can test early enough to then know what treatments that they can do to prevent maybe the brain swelling from occurring, from at least getting to that point. Maybe a coordination of sorts, a conversation about the coordination of this, where more doctors are aware, or more hospitals, more medical outfits are aware of this, and therefore putting it in the battery of tests a little bit higher up on the scale, maybe. So.
Amazing. And Tom?
Yeah, first of all, I would say my experience is consistent with the point that Shawn was just making around um, identifying it sooner in the process. In my case, uh, it took a while. I don't know how many days, but a lot of tests. Uh, it, they had other theories early on, and so it did take a while. So yeah, my experience is consistent with that. And yeah, I guess the only other thing I would add in closing is anything your organization can do to bring visibility. Um, in particular to the need to find a vaccine. A key point that Dr. Fauci made in he had an article in the New York Times, is that it would need to be a global effort, right? Similar to COVID, because you need to have enough cases to test the efficacy, right? And so I don't know what that'll take, who can drive it, but I think that was the key point that came out of that. So I just feel like it may only get worse, all right, with potential global warming, et cetera. So anything your organization can do to bring visibility would be great.
Amazing. Well, Tom and Shawn, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And it's just been a pleasure to have you both, and it's been lovely meeting you. Yeah, finally, I'd like to thank the audience for listening and watching. If you haven't already, please do watch Unconquered, Battling Back After West Nile Virus on YouTube, which is where I watched it. And if you have been affected by any of the issues raised, wherever you live in the world, please contact our support services. Encephalitis International is here to help in whatever way we can to achieve our aim of ending death and disability from encephalitis. For all our information and support services, please visit encephalitis.info. And if you have found this podcast useful or interesting, please consider supporting our life-saving work by visiting encephalitis.info/donate. Thank you again, and see you next time on the Encephalitis Podcast.